Back to our eating question, as we're kind of breaking into Sunday school. Anybody eat anything good this week? Like very memorably good? Just Chick-fil-A. See, there we go. Anything else? Check out this new marker. Look how thick that is. It was National Pizza Week? Man, we all missed out on that. Not all of us. Sarah made pizza, so maybe she was tuned in. What did Allie make? Yeah. What kind? Spelt? What is that? Interesting. That's fun. Anyone else have anything good this week?
Carol baked some lasagna that was pretty tasty.
Lasagna's good. What about like on the sweet end of things? I love my sweets. Strawberry shake. From Chick-fil-A. Did you have any French fries this week? No French fries, man. That's all right. We'll forgive you. Oh, yeah. The shakes just, they're okay. Sorry, I'm just a little behind on. We'll make that one go over here. And then how about we do one right here? I feel like Bob Ross. Like I just put a little line right there.
And draw some little balls.
Yeah, just for a little bird to perch right there, and Oh man, I'll tell you. What's up?
You didn't have any sushi?
Did I have any sushi this week? No, but that's because I had a cold this week. Everything I ate was kind of just a drag. So, so I did not find that much enjoyment in eating this week, but that's okay. There were other good things this week, so we'll put that there. I like that. Good. What do you think? Very good. Yeah, and check that marker. That is a large group setting marker. I am satisfied with my purchase from Amazon. What's that? Hopefully. We'll find out if it's erasable. I tested just a little bit earlier if you can erase it, but that's pretty thick lines, so we'll find out. All right.
If you can't, you can probably use that for a variety of things.
That's right. Yeah, this looks very useful for any class that's taught. You could find a way to work that into your lesson. All right. Welcome to week 3 of our class on Ecclesiastes. Very excited to continue talking through this. In the back, there is a handout. It's not marked up like mine is, but there is a handout. It's an outline of the text. I don't know if I'm going to provide this every week, but the text is outlined in the way I'm going to be talking about it. There are some things on the handout color-coded or highlighted to help you to see things in the text that you might not see just from your 2-column or single-column Bible. And if you're at home actually watching this, if you go to if you go to overlandhills.churchcenter.com, the Church Center app, you can actually download this in the Ecclesiastes group. So I'll be putting these up on Thursdays or Fridays. That group I'm sending emails through to you in the class. These handouts are in that group. There's a little tab that says resources, and you can download these at home. If you don't get emails from the group and you want to get emails and communication, let me know as well. With that, let's pray. Father, we are humbled to be able to read your word out loud and hear your voice. And we recognize that if you don't help us and instruct us by your Spirit, we won't understand a thing. It will just have been noise. But we do trust that because you have put us in Christ, that we are beloved children in him, that you're gracious and you do help your children to understand your thoughts and your words and your works. So, as we dig into a somewhat perplexing book, and as we seek to understand your wisdom, give us insight by the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today's class, Lord willing, will be somewhat interactive as we go through sections of the text here in Ecclesiastes 3. I hope that we can work through both understanding what is the text saying and then really the implications for how it makes us feel. Like, what does this mean for our lives? Before we get to Ecclesiastes, I want to read you something from Philippians 2. I want us to be able to see the connection of the wisdom, because that's the type of book that we're reading in Ecclesiastes. The wisdom of Ecclesiastes is in, I would say, in the wisdom that is Christ. Christ is our wisdom. If you don't know that, that's from 1 Corinthians. But Christ is our wisdom. From Christ, you are made wise. Apart from Christ, you have nothing. You might have worldly wisdom, but you don't have true wisdom, lasting wisdom. And so what we're looking at in Ecclesiastes, any wisdom you gain in the Bible, any life you gain in the Bible, any goodness you gain in the Bible is something that is ultimately in Jesus and understood through Jesus and exists for Jesus. So there's some wisdom for us, a way of thinking, a way of understanding things found here in Philippians 2, verses 5 to 9. Have this mind among yourselves. So that's like, how do you think? Like, how do you perceive things? That's why it's wisdom. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name. Great scholar Graham Goldsworthy, in his book Gospel and Wisdom, says this. He says that Christian wisdom is a conforming of the mind to the gospel. So you're conforming your mind to the shape, the way of thinking that the gospel gives. Which means that if you possess the gospel, you possess wisdom. Now, what does that mean? So, conforming the mind to the gospel. That through the gospel, I don't know if you've ever thought through this, the gospel reveals to mankind the purpose of everything. Like, why does anything exist? It's for Christ, for the praise of Christ, what we just read, that he has this name above every name. Why does everything exist? Why is it, though, that this good thing, this prized treasure of Jesus, we don't always experience the goodness of him, we don't grasp the goodness of him because there's sin. So the gospel also reveals to us what's lacking in mankind, what's dividing man from the goodness of Jesus. And so the gospel is the lens through which we should perceive everything. Literally, I'm talking everything in the universe, everything seen and unseen. The gospel will give you true insight to be able to understand what it really is. And so as we look at Philippians 2, we'll come back to this at the end, Lord willing, we see similar themes in the life of Jesus to what we're going to experience in Ecclesiastes. We see someone who comes in the likeness of man, living his life under the sun, subjected to the futility of the world, that's Christ. He's not grasping after trying to be like God, thinking, I have privilege, I have rights. Rather, he takes the form of a servant. He subjects himself to God. He submits himself to God. And then in the end, actually, after trusting God, fearing God with his life, Christ, he gains something. And so those themes I want us to see as we move through Ecclesiastes 3. So that's just kind of a primer, thinking the gospel is our wisdom. Like I've heard it said, and I think this is completely true, the youngest child, like a 5-year-old, who possesses the gospel is wiser than Richard Dawkins, wiser than the wisest, smartest atheist in the world. Because the atheist doesn't get it. They don't know why we're here. What do we exist for? Who's God? Who am I? All those questions are absent in their mind, or answers to those questions. And the answers that they create themselves are not wisdom. It's not true wisdom. It's not going to last. So we'll come back to Christ as we move through Ecclesiastes 3. Now, to our handout, Ecclesiastes, and I have some help for us today, because we're going to be talking again about what mankind does under the sun. So about what is it like to live our life for these 70 or 80 years on earth. And I thought that to help us to visualize, sorry, I should have had this tape ready, to visualize what it's like for man to live under the sun, we would need a man. Like, we need a man to like think like what is life through. So I went through my phone and just at random, total random, selected a picture and thought that we would track a man's life and imagine what would it be like to live under the sun in this man's shoes. So here's our man. Now, just to keep it fair, like, because we don't want anybody to feel like I don't want to single anyone out, we'll just go with like a generic name and let's call him John. What do you think? This is John. All right. So we're going to watch John's life play out and ask questions. What would it be like to be John? So let's go to Ecclesiastes 3, 1 to 8. The first 8 verses. For everything, there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Profound poetry. And in another sense, just really simple. Like, probably most of us could have written that poem. So what's going on here? The preacher here in Ecclesiastes is drawing our attention, obviously, to this word time. We're supposed to be thinking about time. And he's drawing our attention to a specific way about thinking about time, which might be a little different than the way we perceive it, as in the sense of like occasions or seasons. There are seasons to life. There are periods, chapters. Like I use that phrase all the time. Like the next chapter in our life. And he's drawing our attention to these different chapters that mankind, in his life under the sun, lives in. So all of these times, verses 2 to 8, are emotions or states of being or actions that mankind will take part in. And as you see, as you ponder why are they ordered this way, why are they structured this way, they're very much poles, right? So the first one is born, die. That's a pole of a season, like the season of life. But there are other poles, so seeking and losing. Things like that happen in life. There's what you're seeking, you're losing. As you look through the full list, you see that this is, in a sense, I think what the writer is trying to do is to draw our attention to the full spectrum of human experience. There's a few reasons for that. Obviously, starting with born and die, so just what life is itself, ending with those phrases of love and hate, peace and war, which is like the relational stuff that we really think is like what matters in life. And then everything in between seems to be, here's a full spectrum of the seasons that you will experience in your life. These are descriptive, not prescriptive. Like, make sure that everyone experiences every single one of these seasons, but these things will happen to mankind under the sun. Let's think through some of these really quick, just to get categories in our head, because some of these I know are a little strange. You'll notice, here's one more of the reason why thinking about them as a full spectrum. There's 7 sets of stanzas, so there's actually 28 words, like love, hate, die, peace, those sorts of things. But they're set up in these little stanzas of 2 complementary seasons, so born, die, plant, and pluck up what is planted. And so 7 in the Bible being a number that's used often for completeness, it seems saying this is like the complete sphere of seasons and occasions mankind will experience. The first 2 stanzas, verse 2 and 3, talk about beginnings and endings. Life is full of beginnings and endings. So born and die, that's a beginning and an ending. Agriculturally, or just the work we do, we plant things and then you pluck up what's planted. It's not like you plant something and it's like forever. No, there's an intent to planting it and then plucking it up. The beginnings and endings continue in verse 3. Kill and heal. Break down and build up. So the 2 images are like kill and heal are living things. So those things in our life, things that are living. Break down and build up. Construction. Again, man's labor in life. We try to build things. Maybe it's a building, but it might just be like friendships. It might be build up our children, those sorts of things. We do works. We break things down, we build them up. Verse 4 talks about a different type of season, emotional seasons. Verse 4 is emotional seasons. Weeping and laughing, mourning and dancing. So both weeping and laughing seems to be maybe a little more personal, and then mourning and dancing is a little more public. So we have seasons where we have inner turmoil, inner sadness, depression, anxiety. But other times we're just filled with bliss. It doesn't matter what anything's going on around us. Those private times of emotions. But then also in the second half of verse 4, sometimes we publicly mourn or mourn together. Sometimes we dance and let people know we're having a good time. The seasons continue. Verse 5 is a little strange. What does it mean to cast away stones and to gather stones? What kind of season is that? It could be referring to an agricultural season, like you got to clean this field out, get all the stones out of there so then you can till up the soil and all that. Another way I've seen talked about this verse is that it's like gathering wealth and then spending, because stones can be sometimes precious stones. So it's like you're gathering some wealth for yourself and then you're spending, you're casting it out. Embracing, refrain from embracing seems to relate to affections or greetings. People come and go. I mean, you just live in this church for long enough, and you know there are seasons where someone came and then they leave. Verse 6 talks about possessions. This is a season we'll experience in our life. Seasons of seeking, maybe gaining something, and then seasons of losing. A season of keeping something, and at times we have to cast it away. Verse 7 talks about the seasons in life of like our responses to what goes on around us. So tearing and sowing. I think this refers to that phrase like dust and ashes, or like you read in the Old Testament, when something really bad happens, somebody rips their clothes as a response of just, the agony. So that's a response to the things we experience in life, but at some point, the agony ends. Like, I think about when you go to a funeral, it's like, especially if it's someone near and dear to you, it's so weird how eventually you have to like leave and go back on with your life. And at some point, like, you can't just mourn for 30 years. I guess some people do. I think that's actually how my grandpa died. He lost his wife, and maybe about 8 years later died. And most of, I think, what killed him was just the loss. Like, he couldn't let go. Like, it's so hard. And we get that. It's tough. And so there's seasons of tearing and sowing, mourning. Silence and speaking. Wisdom. There's times to speak up, and there's times to close your mouth. That's very much like you think about, yeah, I know, right? It can be in positive ways or just like don't be a fool. You think about the wisdom of the Proverbs. That's telling you there are seasons to speak, and there are seasons where you're going to seem so much wiser if you just keep your mouth shut. There are times when somebody needs a good word spoken to them, or sometimes they just need your presence. They don't need your words. And then finally in verse 8, again, dealing with relationships, there is time for love, a time for hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. Probably verse 8, the beginning, talking about individual relationships. There are seasons where we feel and experience love and hate, or love and loss in relationships personally. And then on a more national scale, there's love and hate on national scales, where there's war, times of war, seasons of war, and seasons of peace. This is our experience in life. This is what we experience in our life under the sun. Again, these are things that are the preacher's describing, here's what you will experience, not what you should necessarily seek out, but just he's observing that's kind of life. Like, these things happen. And so, in order to understand this, Mr. Tafoya, I need your help. With our randomly selected, generically named John, I thought what we would do is we would create a life for John based on these times and seasons. So I wrote some of them up here on the little wheel. And we're, just because, again, this is just describing. So these seasons don't happen to everybody or necessarily at the exact same times, right? Some people are born into hardship, but some people are born into prosperity. Some people fall in love once and then the love ends when the person dies. And some people fall in love 3 times and it ends 3 times. So we're just going to create, rather at random, a life for John to get a sense of what Ecclesiastes is saying. So I need you to spin the wheel. Now, I get to select the first one. John was born, and then John, one day, will die. Okay, those are kind of given. Like, you can't really replace those. That's why I think it's the first one in the list. So Mr. Tafoya said that he really wanted to spin the wheel, so he volunteered. So would you spin the wheel, and we will select the first season of John's life. What's it going to be? Laughter! Ooh, that's a good way to start. Laugh. A time to laugh. What a great, like a joyful baby, just filled with, and then you think about this. So go back to seasons and your own experience now. This is why it's worthwhile to think through this. Some of you had the baby who just brought joy to you and to everybody around you, and some of you had the kid who was colicky or just something was wrong, and it was not that season, right? So this is how we all experience life a little differently. Okay, let's get another season for John's life. This is going to be a long one, so make it good. Lose. Ooh, that's a lot of loss. Hopefully you can kind of read this. So that's interesting thinking, like, what might it be, the season of John's life? Like, maybe parents dying, right? Like, some of us, like, at a young age, I think his dad died when he was super young, and so him and his brothers became the men of the house. Like, the laughing may have lingered a little bit through that youthful phase of life, but then there's this major loss. Next season. Embrace. Oh, that's good. John got married. Embrace, right? Or something. Maybe he made a really good friend kind of in his 20s or 30s, and so he's got some friendship there. Just like going to hold on to that. But again, that season's going to come to an end, just like even the loss is going to come to an end at some point. Okay, let's see. What's next? A short season. Hopefully it's a good one too. Well, that's kind of weird. Too embracing if it's wives, so. War. John got shipped out to war. Or maybe he's just affected by it back here in the States. So that's interesting. So that's fitting, right? Like about maybe 18 or so, got drafted for the war. And then he wrote this girl back, home, and they're writing notes and all that. And like that time of embracing started. Pretty cool. Like we're making a good life here. Let's see what the last season we have for his life. Silence. Whoa. That's interesting. That's interesting considering. All right, you're good, Dave. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody clap for Dave. You are a good life creator person. So that's interesting thinking, what might this be, right? What might the silence in his life be? It could be something going wrong with the embracing. Maybe that's why it ends here. It could just be hardship, PTSD from this. It could be as he comes to terms with the loss that he had, that it's just, I'm just like, life's a little slower. I don't need to be so quick with my tongue. But this is what Ecclesiastes is trying to say. This is what life is like. You will experience this in your life. Times happen to you. Seasons happen to you. Yeah.
I love the visual of how they overlap.
Yeah.
It isn't just that you're in this, and then you're in this. You are in some seasons at the same time. And that visual just really made that.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah, that's why I wanted the visual is those seasons. It's not like, all right, because the first one, time to be born. Well, I have to die first before I can fall in love. That's not it, right? These seasons all overlap. And it's interesting thinking about, I think about embracing. For Sarah and I, the season of Overland Hills Church for us is now coming to an end as we go to seminary. So it's interesting for me, I'm thinking, when is Overland Hills season, whatever this embrace has been, when does that end? Is it done now? Because I can already feel, just honest, we all know it, I feel myself there in Minneapolis a little bit, but I'm not removed from here. Or maybe the season ends the day we leave, the Sunday we're gone, the last hug, done. It was nice, Or maybe it's a year into seminary, you realize, oh, that memory is kind of faded. But that's just the experience of life, and these just kind of all ebb and flow, and they happen to you. That's the big thing. Seasons happen to us. John didn't create this. Dave Tafoya did. So we got to get the separation. Just a question really quick. When we think about the word time, is this the way that we think, or maybe the way the scripture uses it, is this the way we talk about time typically? How do we use that word regularly? Linearly. Okay, so what do you mean? Yes. Well, so that's interesting. So Bob says we think about time linearly, we're left to right people, right? It'd be interesting if we were like Hebrews who read right to left. What would that do us? Or if you're, is it Chinese? It's down? Whoa, we're so oriented left to right. There's a timeline and everything goes that way. I tried, but I couldn't figure out how to do it where it makes sense. I wanted to make this a circle. I think that gives you a better, because the whole thing is that's a life. It's an entity that happened. And just back at the chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, if you remember, there's this cycle of lives coming in and cycle of lives going out. It's very circular, it's almost stuck in this system. But linear seemed to relate to us better. Any other ways we think about time that relate to this or are a little different? Yeah. Yeah, kind of. We'll explain it a little more. So busyness, what do you mean by that?
I think we can think of time as that, I need to do this, I need to do that, and fill our time up with busyness.
Yeah, I like that. So we have this sense of time as busyness, right? So John could be right here, oh my gosh, I have 3 seasons to live in. Whoa, I got a lot of stuff to manage. Wow. And I need to make sure I'm ready for this silence time. And man, that laughter, I miss that. I got to manage all these things. But it is interesting because the poem, and we'll see in a couple verses, is meant to get us the sense of that's not ours. That's Dave Tafoya's, right? But we'll find out it's God's. But the sense is time is a thing that is happening to us, seasons, not something that we have, hold, manage. I'll tell you what season. There's a reason why whoever this random person is didn't come up and spin the wheel, because you don't control what's the next season. You don't. You might be disillusioned into thinking you know what the next season is. I'll tell you what day it's going to start, and you're busy, workings can somehow prove that out. So I think that is a sense in which we do use time. I think it's helpful. We need to know I have 12 hours in a day. What am I going to do with them? But just in James, where he says, you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. You're saying, if the Lord wills, I'll do this or that down the line, but I don't manage this. Yeah.
Here, and I think that's true, we do think that way. When we're in the season, the past season does inform it. So I'm not raising children anymore, but I did raise them. So I remember that, and it informs maybe how I would interact with a younger mom or as a grandparent. So we don't lose the memories or the wisdom gained from that season, and it does inform the next season. I don't know what to think of that.
Yeah, the seasons roll into one another, but even that, it's interesting thinking, because some people come out of parenting very jaded, and don't have kids. How many? I had to say, everybody in this. No offense to the internet, that if you're watching people who work in construction, most people I know in this church who work in construction fields, or just with a bunch of men who are stupid, a lot of guys say, "Why do you want kids? Why do you want kids? Why do you want a wife? That's gonna that's gonna ruin your life." And people come out of relationships not blessed, not looking back on them saying, "Oh, that's made me wiser. That's just made me more ticked at the world." And so, it's weird how these things do snowball into something later on. So very peculiar thinking about time and life. That's what Ecclesiastes is calling us to do, to ask these questions. Let's move on to the next verse. One more verse. The writer of Ecclesiastes wants us, or the preacher wants us, to consider something about this. And he gives us a very peculiar question in response. So all these times, there's a season for everything. And here is his response. What gain has the worker from his toil? What a weird response to that poem, right? Because if you know, there's that song, is it by the Byrds, who ripped off of this text? And the sense in their song of there's a time for this, a time for this, a time for this. It's oh, that's so great. We have all these seasons in life, but everything will be good in the end, And the writer of Ecclesiastes says, there's all these times for this, a time for this. But John's not getting anything out of it. He's not in charge. He's not taking anything after this line's done, at least. What gain does he have? Can he manipulate this in some way to achieve, to gain, to get some profit out of life? No, because time has John. John doesn't have time. Let's see how this plays out as we move on. Verse 10 to 15. I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart. Yet, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God endures forever, whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is, already has been. And that which is to be, already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. It's just it gets really rich, really fast. That first question's really poignant. And now we have this new actor. If you think through the book of Ecclesiastes thus far, the main doer, the one who's been working so much through Ecclesiastes is man. The preacher's trying to say, what should man do under the sun? What should man toil for? And he comes to this conclusion in the last chapter. I can't gain anything. I can't, my labors are not going to achieve what I think they're going to achieve. But then the writer of Ecclesiastes realizes, there's another worker. There's someone else doing things in this mystery of life, and his name's God. And so I highlighted in orangish, brownish red the things that it says God does. God has given man things to do. He has made everything beautiful in his time. He put eternity in man's heart. He has a gift for man. So what what's going on is the writer of Ecclesiastes is drawing our attention with all this time to the fact right now, let's say, that John lives right here. That's John, that's called present. That's past, that's future. But this is what is. That's what's going on right now. He says, I've seen what God has given the children of man to be busy with. God has made everything beautiful in its time. Now, that's a kind of a weird phrase because it's like, oh, silence and loss. Oh, it's so pretty. Like, that's not the sense of it. Beautiful meaning like fitting. There's an orderliness to why this happened. It was not like this wheel. This wheel is actually kind of intentional to say, that is not how God designed John's life. That's not how times happen. God's not like, well, let's see what's going to happen after church today. Oh, embracing. That's kind of nice. That's kind of a good way to end. Like that's not how God just determines what's going to take place in the world. There's a fitting, a beauty, a structure to it. He's put eternity into man's heart. So here's my sense of eternity now. So there is things that go beyond John's life. There are things that exist before John and after John. Though the fact that John dies, there's probably meaning to why this existed. So why did John's life exist? So we have a sense of permanence. I read this idea of God putting eternity into man's heart is this knowledge or this desire that we want to pass from a fragmentary knowledge to the fuller meaning of the whole pattern. So in God's eyes, there is a full meaning to life. He looks at this and says, I get it. And there's a structure and an order and a beauty to it. Mankind has a sense of eternity, like there's a sense of order. There's got to be purpose to this. There's got to be structure to this. And we want to go from like, why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Put the puzzle pieces together and say, now I get it. So we have that sense in our hearts, yet, second half of verse 11, so that we cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. God gives us a sense that there's purpose, meaning, beginnings and endings, things that endure beyond our lives, but not to the point where we can grasp it all. We don't have the knowledge of God. That's the sense of that verse. We have a sense that there's a God. This is different than a gecko, like wandering on a wall, changing colors and stuff. He's just geckoing about in his life. Not really asking these questions that we're asking, not sitting in Sunday school with a bunch of geckos saying like, why is my life this way? We have that sense, but we don't know all the answers. There's a humility that this is calling us for. And so the writer of Ecclesiastes says, John, what should you do? At this present moment, what should you do? What is good to be done? You should be joyful. You should do good. There's like an ethical quality to it. You should live a good life, a righteous life, as long as you live. Verse 13, everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in his toil. This is God's gift to man. You see, if you get strung up on what came before, what's going to come after, what's the purpose of all of my life, what am I going to gain, you get lost in those questions, how to fit all the pieces together, you're never living here. Your mind is somewhere over here. You're trying to figure it out, but ironically, your mind's not like literally here, like because this is real, this is truth. Your mind is in what might the future hold? What might I accomplish? What might God be doing in my life? And the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying, don't spend too much time there. Spend the time in the present of what you know that God has given you. God has given you loss, embrace, and silence in your life right here and a host of other seasons. Find whatever joy that he gives you in those moments. In your work, as you work through the last phase of your loss, as you process through that, as you embrace your wife or your friends or whatever it may be, enjoy that, treasure it, work hard, and in the labor of the present moment, enjoy it. Find life and purpose in that, rather than thinking, what might come? What might I be able to accomplish afterward? That is God's gift to us. He goes on, kind of reflecting on this eternal nature of things. What God has done endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything be taken away from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. The reason why God has given us a sense of God has done this thing, God has created this, there's a beginning, there's an end, there's things beyond it, there's purpose. We can't figure it out. The reason why God has given us that sense, an eternal sense, it's like your sixth sense, is a sense of eternity, permanence, and purpose. He has given that sense to you so that you'd fear him, so you'd revere him. Again, the gecko is not looking at his life saying, aha, this is what happens in geckos' lives. There are seasons of geckos and loss and love and those sorts of things. Oh, but I don't know exactly why it's all happening, but I'm going to fear my maker who's the one who's making it happening. But what the writer of Ecclesiastes is drawing our attention to is we know this. We get a sense that time just happens to us. And we also get a sense, we know this. This is the thing that makes us so unique. There's meaning in it. We can't grasp it all. And what we ought to do, rather, is fear the one who does grasp it. Fear the one who's in control of it. For time's sake, we should move on, so I can hopefully ask you a few more questions. Verse 16 to the end. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. And I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they are themselves are but beasts or animals. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts are the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts. For all is hevel, smoky, breathy. All go to one place. All are from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work. That's that red line. Rejoice in that work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Now, there's some peculiar things in this text, to say the least. I think they work in the story of Ecclesiastes. The sense of what's going on here at the end of this section is the writer's drawing our attention to the fact that we know, because of this sense of eternity and a sense of moral right and wrong, one day justice will be served. When he says that, God will judge the righteous and the wicked. So he looks and says, in the place of justice, I bet you've never seen this before, a judge who acts wickedly. You ever heard about that? You know? Or in the place of righteousness, where there should be, like a pastor who acts wickedly. You ever seen, like, that happens, like, welcome to life. But there's this internal sense, I think that, again, that sense of eternity that we have, like, where's the justice? Why does that judge get away with that? Why does that pastor get away with abusing X, Y, and Z? And the preacher says, God will judge. That's going to happen. And he says this, there is a time for every matter and every work, meaning there's a time for judgment somewhere over here. Like he grasps that too. There's a time of, I would say, testing, and then a time of judgment, of justice, where did you meet the test? So he goes on and says he's given, why are these things happening? Why is this sense of life? I said in my heart, with regard to the children of man, God is testing them that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. So with this knowledge of a coming judgment that the gecko doesn't have, with the knowledge of purpose and meaning and righteousness and good, there is a test. God is trying us. He's putting us through the fire in this hevel, smoky life to see, do we think we're really significant? Do we think we can exploit our life in the present to gain in the future? Or do we just respond in fear and submission to him? That's the question at hand. This test of life is, do we think that we can somehow gain something, which would mean essentially transcend death? Or do we submit to the confines, the limitations of our lives? God is testing us to see that we are beasts. You see, when you're in a place of righteousness or a place of justice, you're like high up, and you think, I'm the king of the world. I can do whatever I want. And the problem is, when you're sitting at the king of the world, you don't realize you're going to die one day, and you're not the king anymore. And what you achieved there, as we process through the book of Ecclesiastes, this will just keep showing up. What you achieved in that place of justice or in that high place of righteousness will not linger with you after. You're not going to take your achievements. God's not going to say, oh, you were the chief justice of fill in the blank. Oh, wow, you were really great, even though you were wicked. No, God's going to say, you didn't get it. You didn't understand. I gave you that lot in life. I gave you that position, and you tried to exploit it for your own ends rather than received it as a gift from me. And so the writer of Ecclesiastes wants us to realize this about our life under the sun. To get a better grasp on who John really is. If you want to be wise, you would heed this message. This is John. From dust to dust. If you think somehow you're going to gain something, you have wishful thinking, way too high a view of yourself, because this is your end. Again, we're talking about life under the sun, so I know some of you might be like, Jesus, resurrection, we'll get to that in a second. But this is the sense of your life lived under the sun. That's where you came from. You came like naked dust. You didn't bring a crown on your head. You didn't bring this helmet. You didn't bring those glasses. You didn't bring that shirt or your sweet goatee. It's just as dust. You started as dust, and you're going to end back in the same spot. We're all going to be buried under the same ground. And we're just going to, or cast in the wind if you're, whatever, but we're just dust. That humility is meant to lead us to realize, I ought to fear God rather than think so highly of myself. So when he says that we're beasts, we're like the animals, he's not saying in everything, because right before this he said, God has put eternity into man's heart. The gecko doesn't have that sense. But like the gecko, we're just going to die, friends. And what I think this, again, relates back to Genesis 3 so much. What I think the writer of Ecclesiastes is trying to draw our attention to is you are not a God. So the way I think about this, when we look in the mirror, like when John looks in the mirror, like this, like look in the mirror. So often you look in the mirror and we see a God. Here's the reason why I say that. Like go home and just like ponder, they do those exercises like look at yourself, and it's funny, most of the time it's like look at yourself in the mirror and like tell yourself good things, and like then you'll feel better about your life. But if you look at yourself in the mirror, so often we have way too elevated a view of who we are. So you might look in the mirror and just see this persona that you've like attached to yourself, like I look like Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the day. Like I got the, and like you see just like a few little like shadows on your arm. You're like, man, I'm ripped. Or you look at yourself and think, man, look what I have achieved. Or look at whatever it may be. You might look at yourself and say, I'm the king of the world. This day in front of me, I'm going to conquer it. I'm going to take this day on. Or, again, I would say thinking about yourself like a god, which means thinking too highly of yourself. A lot of us look in the mirror and think really bad thoughts about ourselves. There's not the shadow there, or the shadow there, that's puny. I am not Arnold Schwarzenegger. And if I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm not the king of the world, and that means I'm lousy. And you sit there and ponder and look at the mirror all day long, you're like, I'm nothing. And it's consumed with self, as if life is all about you. That means that you think you're a god if you think life is all about you. This text, thinking about life, this time that God manages, John's life, John is not God. God is God. John is dust in this story. And so when you look in the mirror, I encourage you, try to see yourself as dust. Look at dust looking back at you. That's the point of Ecclesiastes, is look at your death in the face, and that's going to give you a lot of wisdom on how should you react to this life you've been given. Because God's given you this. Are you going to shake your fist at him and say, Why the loss? I don't deserve that. Or today, I'm gonna suppress the loss. I can do that. Or you say, that's what God has given me, and I'll receive it. And that's where I think when you look in the mirror too, you should see you're dust, but you're beloved dust. Isn't that interesting? So you're a different kind of dust than an animal, right? Like, because you have that spirit in you. That is, you have the image of God in you. Let me finish a couple thoughts and we'll talk. A question in light of this text is John trapped? So if you actually got this text, because some people I would say even who interpret Ecclesiastes would say, the sense of this text is saying, well, you're just trapped. God's just there spinning the wheel, like whatever comes next, and I guess silence is the next thing in your life. You can't do anything about it, so you might as well just like make the best of it. That could be what he's saying. Is John trapped? Or in understanding that this is your life in light of eternity, are you free to actually live like in the present? Does this knowledge, this wisdom, this insight into something that not everybody gets, is that trapping you? Or is it free? Like, oh, I don't have to like try to create something over here. I don't have to try to establish something. I don't have to doubt everything back here. Rather, I'm free to just embrace what I have today, to fear God and do good and receive the good things he gives me with joy. That's the freedom that Ecclesiastes, this view of life, is trying to give us. And that's where we get drawn back into who Jesus is. You think about Jesus, the most free man who ever walked the earth, who too, in essence, trapped himself, that's the wrong word, submitted himself, that's the right word, to this experience. He submitted himself to his Father's will. That's when it says he didn't see the form of God as something to be grasped, to take advantage. I'm God, I can do what I want. He says, no, Father, your will, not mine. I do what my Father says. And so the seasons of Christ's life, though he knew them, he's God, he submitted himself, he subjected himself to them, and lived in every single one of them, not complaining, not thinking, how can I pull this off differently? You see a little bit of a debate right at the end of his life, like, Lord, if there's another way to do this, like if I cannot go to the cross, would you please like withhold that? But not my will, but yours be done. Even at the hardest moments of his life, where it's like loss, silence, war, hate, everything at once. And he says, oh, come on, God, like, is there a way out of this? Jesus says, but still, I fear you, not my will, your will. And from that, through that life, Jesus uniquely actually did gain out of it, because Jesus subjected himself to it. He enjoyed the life he had, he lived the life he had, and then out of it, he gains that name above every name. This is why I think that the wisdom of Ecclesiastes is so tightly connected to the wisdom of the gospel that's supposed to give us a really small view of ourselves, a very humble view of ourselves in our sin, a very high view of God, and just a treasuring, a cherishing. If you know Jesus right now, and you have hope of the day of judgment, which is the day of the resurrection, which is the day of justice, if you have hope in that, you live a life right now out of pleasure, out of delight, out of contentment, because you don't have to manage your life. God has already, in Christ, set you on a path for gain, which is gaining him. So, if you are in Christ, you don't have to be a grasper, trying to be a God. Rather, you can walk freely in fear as a servant and yield to God, receiving Christ's achievement. So if you have Christ, you have wisdom. There's that song that we so often quote in lessons, often about rejecting the pleasures of this world and not being a consumer and not being, obsessed with worldly things. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. And I want you to think about that song in light of this a little differently. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely clear in the light of his glory and grace. Now, I know what the song is saying before, like they're not, when they grow dim, you're like, I don't want to hold on to them, like, because I'm not going to take them, I'm dust. I'm not taking my helmet with me, so I'm not going to cling to my helmet. But that helmet, this embracing, this silence, all the things I have today, in this moment, in this room, becomes so much clearer when I see them through Christ and the bigger story that's beyond this. And then so, like right now, in Sunday school, John can live a joyful, obedient, fearing God, and righteous life by simply just yielding to that vision he gets of Christ. So that's what Ecclesiastes is calling us to. Sorry, we were meant to dialogue, but time. It's very peculiar, isn't it? So this was a time for speaking. So thank you all, and I'll send it out. I think next week's homework is Ecclesiastes 4. Read it through 3 times, write out some observations, and I'll send some stuff out via the group on Planning Center. So thank you. If you have any questions, come ask or email me, because even if I don't know the answer, I like the question.